We're living through a moment where very different stories happening right now expose something fundamental about freedom, power, and discourse. You have mass protests in Iran where people are literally risking, and in many cases, losing their lives for the right to speak, organize, and dissent. You have a deadly federal law enforcement shooting in Minneapolis that immediately became a political national flashpoint. And you have the 5-year anniversary of January 6th, 2021, a day that still divides this country, and I don't remember being as angry ever since. Where some people continue to believe, wrongly, the 2020 election was stolen, despite overwhelming evidence that it was not. Wow, was I ashamed to be American that day. The common thread tying all these three together is an ideology. It's whether a society allows disagreement, debate, and even the wrong beliefs to exist, especially in the public sphere. Let's start with Iran. For more than a week, protests spread across, initially driven by economic collapse, inflation, currency devaluation, overall weakening of their spending power, but quickly escalating into an open rejection of the clerical rule. What did the regime do in response? It shut down the internet. It restricted people's phone service. It attempted to sever Iranians from each other and from the outside world. It's not incidental. It's defensive. Public discourse is exactly what authoritarian regimes fear the most. Because once people can communicate freely, share information, and challenge narratives in real time, control just becomes harder. You can't have an iron fist when people can actually freely communicate with one another. Reports from journalists and human rights groups indicate hundreds of deaths and mass arrests, numbers that are difficult to independently verify, but precisely because communication has been shut down. People are being killed for the act of dissent itself. Bring it back home. This week in Minnesota, a U.S. citizen, Renee Nicole Good, was fatally shot by a federal ICE agent during an enforcement operation. Almost immediately, something very familiar happened, too familiar in my opinion, and it's worth sitting with. Before investigators completed their work, before federal use of force policies were examined, before all available video was reviewed and contextualized, how many of us can think of people who rushed into their corners? Those ideologically aligned with federal enforcement immediately adopted the official framing of self-defense, domestic terrorism, justified use of force. We won't collaborate with the blue state administrations. Others immediately labeled it murder, reckless violence, proof of systemic abuse, maybe something against LGBTQ. Many of those positions were just not formed by looking at the facts. They were downloaded from figureheads and people that they already were comfortable with ideologically and probably uniformly consuming their media diet. This is something we should be honest about. Our political reflex is often to borrow certainty before earning it. What's the department's use of force policy actually permit? What does the video show in full context? What do investigators conclude after reviewing evidence, not after reading talking points? And here's the key distinction. We are allowed to slow down and ask those questions. We are allowed to argue about it publicly. We are allowed to criticize federal agencies. We are allowed to protest. We are allowed to demand transparency. We will have regularly scheduled elections. That argument may be ugly. It may be emotional. It may be flawed, but it happens out in the open. That matters. Now let's talk about January 6th. 5 years later, there are still people, including some who were prosecuted, and fortunately, in my opinion, they were later pardoned. They still believe the 2020 election was stolen. A study came out this week showing while they were pardoned, they were not remorseful for what they've done. They acknowledged that legally, they know they broke the law, but it was necessary and in their patriotism of saving the country, to do what they did. And while they got a pardon, they want the administration to go further in aiding and administering reparations for the wrongful prosecution of the January 6th rioters. Now, how demented is that? Not one court found that there was any evidence of election rigging. They should count their lucky stars that they're now free and exonerated of all crimes. But they want to go further in their views that reparations are warranted. Their belief is wrong, unsupported by facts, audits, court rulings, certifications from parties. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We have to face it. They're allowed to believe it in these free United States of America. They're allowed to say it in the Western world. They're allowed to argue it. They're allowed to be wrong in public. And it's not a bug in free society. It's a feature. We are free people, and that's an element of it. The alternative is not correct thinking enforced. The alternative is suppression. In the real marketplace of ideas, bad ideas don't get crushed by force. They get exposed, challenged, debated, and eventually rejected through evidence and discourse. Scientific method, anybody? That process is slow. It's frustrating. It's imperfect. But it beats every other alternative time and time again. Contrast that with Iran. Iran people are dying, not because they're right, but because they're speaking. The regime doesn't care about protesters being correct, coherent, persuasive. All they care about is that they are visible. That's why the internet is shut down. That's why phones go dark. That's why public discourse is treated an existential threat. Here in the United States, even when belief turns into delusion, the answer is not state violence. It's more speech. It's better speech, harder questions, evidence, debate. The Minneapolis police case. This shows exactly how messy that debate can be, and we're going through it now. Go through the Sunday morning shows that are happening at the date of this recording. How painful, emotionally charged, politically exploited these topics are. January 6th shows how stubborn beliefs, even by those who are just so wrong, can be. Iran shows what happens when discourse itself is treated as treason. And that's the connective tissue between all three stories. Just thought of it this week. Freedom is not clean. Democracy isn't tidy. Public discourse isn't always wise. But the ability to question authority, criticize power, argue facts, and even be wrong without the fearing of death, that's the line between a free society and an authoritarian one. People in Iran are dying for that line. Literally. The least we can do in these free United States of America, the greatest country in the world, is respect it. Guys, if you like my video, I'm putting together a live stream 3 times a week around centrists. A working person like myself, I don't do this full time. I just like to keep informed. Subscribe to my channel below. You'll find exactly when I'm going live. And if you want the insight, the ability to call into those live streams so that we can interact over the day's headline, feel free to sign up for my newsletter below, where we get to talk on the stream as it happens. Thanks, guys. See you next time.